to thank you for this day, for sparing lives and for keeping us safe. And we thank you for everyone on the panel that you would open our hearts and minds, give us the right words to speak, help us to give us wisdom and understanding. To all listeners and those watching, that you be with them also, bless them. Be with Anguilla, Antigua, and the rest of the Caribbean uh, and Barbuda, and continue to bless us. We ask you that you bless this program. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Well, we see quite a lot happening in the globe today. Against most advice, including the Gulf states, we saw the United States of America attack Iran along with Israel. And out of that, Israel has followed through with their promise to close the Strait of Hormuz. And with that comes a lot of consequences, not only for the United States of America, for the Arab states, but indeed the entire world. Um, Here in Angola, and of course in Antigua, we will be faced with a lot of challenges. What do you see, Peter, coming out of this quagmire?
Well, good evening. Are you hearing me?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
All right. So good evening. First, let me thank you to the host for having me on this discussion this evening. I count it to be an honor and a privilege. I'm very happy to be here. That's the first thing I want to say. And now to the topic at hand. Ah, I think in our preliminaries just before we got in here, I was told the intention is to bring it home from the very start. And from a small island perspective, of course, the first thing we're facing is increased prices. Oil prices increasing is going to impact us. The question becomes, what does our government do? The cost of it'll impact basically everything. Oil prices, our fuel prices, shipping rates, the cost of food, everything. So for me, it's about how do we respond and react as small island economies? How do we utilize the fact that we have a single currency union? How do we utilize our reserve positions? How do we come together and perhaps look at different opportunities to procure our goods? And how does it impact on our bread and butter, our gold, our tourism economy? And so, for me, those are the key areas that I think we are going to be impacted by. Of course, there's also the issue of foreign policy and how the foreign policy of our big neighbor with the big stick and Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny, how those are going to impact on us, and how does our interaction with Europe and further afield, how does all of that allow us as small islands in the Caribbean region, in the OECS, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union in particular, to navigate and for us as a people to survive and thrive. I think thriving is very important. I'm not about just surviving. Thrive as a people, as a region. I think those are my introductory remarks.
Dr. Paul, what do you think governments in the Caribbean can do to reduce or mitigate the impact of what is happening? Because we see in Barbados, we see in the budget speech by Mayor Motley, not the, but she didn't make the budget speech, but the announcement by the Mayor Motley administration, a number of measures that they are putting in place to mitigate any issues relating to this global crisis. We also see a number of other islands, including Antigua, just recently raised the pensions and so forth for the pensioners, just to soften the blow. What do you think Anguilla can do, short of just electricity credits, if the government so desire? Because we know the government of Angola have decided that they won't be giving out any handouts. But what do you think government of Angola can do to reduce the impact of this global crisis?
You have to unmute, Doc.
Dr. Foy, we're not hearing you. I think you probably be unmute. Dr. Webster, you want to jump in the meantime so we don't have any dead here?
All right, we good now.
Okay,
So
okay.
you didn't hear anything I said, right? So let's start over.
No, we didn't hear anything you said. No, no.
I was saying that government exists in large part to look after the welfare of the people, right? Um, so we can have the discussion tonight, but at the end of the day, it is what good comes out of it that can translate into tangible benefits to the people, right? Um, all the islands like us, these small islands, we have our challenges and constraints, right? Our our standing, like in international trade and whatnot, our standing, we are not power brokers. We don't have that much power. So it's all about what we do within to mitigate. Now, mitigation measures don't come for free. They will they will cost money, even if the transfer doesn't have any cost to the persons receiving them. So the first thing is, what is our financial situation in Anguilla that will enable us to assist, and to what extent? What can we subsidize? What can we do at the port of entry regarding giving easement on taxes and so on? Because if the tax meets you at the port, it's going to end in the shop, right? It will end in the shop. So what is possible? It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? But some easement. So you could even focus on certain food products, the main ones. Um, I don't have a list in my head right now, but the main consumption products, some ease on that. But as far as I know, for example, there's no GST on certain foods, right? That's already has been removed. So we have the revenue source with the AI money. What can we use from that to maybe increase pensions? Because the pensioners are stuck at a certain level, and with inflation coming, what used to be $100 will now be something less, right? So seek to help the pensioners, seek to ease the burden on prices, but how do you do that? The GST is already not on goods, on a lot of food stuff. So other options would be to seek to subsidize what? What can we subsidize? That's a question I can't answer this minute. What is subsidized? But something along those lines.
Dr. Webster, just today, you issue a major address to the nation and to the government of Angola. Because when you were leader of Angola, when you were the premier of Angola, you did a number of measures to really help the people of Angola. They included electricity credits. They included removing property tax from all residential homes. They included removing duties and taxes from medication, food, and there's so many things that we can count that you were able to do. But today you call for even more of that. So in keeping with what you have done and the things that you have called for the government to do, what more can you add to this discussion as it relates to easements and relief that the government of Angola can provide to the people of Angola?
Again, let me say good evening to all, to the panel, and to Anguillians in Anguilla and abroad. Uh, this program is here for us to share ideas and to as one people impress upon each other how for survival. And I think the goal is that in these times of economic stress, uh, And whether it's from a pandemic, whether it's from a natural disaster, we need to have stimulus packages because, as was said earlier, what happens elsewhere impacts us significantly and directly. And I think the goals are two or threefold. One would be relief for our people. Two would be to preserve our businesses. And then the third would be to stimulate the economy. And these are all areas that government, if government has that ability, needs to take some steps to preserve businesses, provide relief, and to keep the economy going. And now, we came in 2020 in the middle of COVID. The country was essentially shut down, and we had to find ways to preserve lives and hoods. And I think that we're almost at that same point right now, because even though, there are not bombs and drones dropping upon us in Anguilla, we are feeling the impact thereof in terms of increased cost of shipping, the cost of fuel, the supply chains being limited. And so, uh, on top of what we had already done in terms of Senior Shield and Junior Shield, and we're providing health care for our people, and that meant that they had certain monies that they could keep in their pockets and spend on other things because they didn't have to pay into the healthcare system. We also have electricity credits, which are very important. I mean, our goal was to get Anglec towards renewable energy, a full transition. And you can imagine now if Anguilla was at that point where we had most of our electricity from solar and wind, that we wouldn't be so concerned about what's happening in the outer world because we would have, the energy provided but from the sun. And once that grid and the infrastructure was set up, the what I proposed today and our proposal is to make sure that we could keep down the cost of food, the cost of bringing goods into Anguilla, essential items. In April of 2023, we passed the, allowed the essential items, a basket of goods, which was not just food, but other essential items in terms of sanitary napkins and other things that are essential. We made sure that the duties were removed. Hold 1 second there. I'm
Ms. Williams, even I'm sure you'll be feeling the pinch in Antigua as well. What is the government of Antigua doing to mitigate against this serious issue that we find ourselves in?
Well, of course, there are a couple of, well, first and foremost, the first thing the government is doing is calling, well, the last thing the government is doing is calling elections. Antigua is currently in elections mode. And I think that is in large measure due to the likely looming effects, continued effects on the economy. In particular, it could impact government's fiscal resources. And so the government has decided, let us seek a fresh mandate so that we have a longer time period to ride out this wave. That's the first thing I want to put on the record. Also, in terms of impact on the citizens, a number of measures. One, for the public service, there's been a 5%, a preliminary 5% increase in salaries across the board for public servants. This is part of the negotiations for the incoming package. There's also been an increase in the minimum wage. The National Minimum Wage Committee met recently and recommended a movement from the current minimum wage, which is which was, because it just went up, which was 9.20, and we all have EC dollar, to 13.50 an hour. and the government did an intermediary of 11.50 because the recommendation was that that jump would have been too significant on the business community, and so it's going to be a gradual look over time. Also, from the budgeted surplus for the 2026 assessment and the surplus from 2025, mainly driven in large part by the CIP, the government is holding fuel prices constant. So the increased prices has already come through in terms of the supplies, but the government is presently holding the price constant. Now that brings a two-sided conversation because the current market price is very similar to the prices way back in 2012. And interestingly, the price at that time was lower than it is now. And so there's a conversation about, well, is it that the prices could have fallen previously and the government held it because the government, of course, gets the consumption tax. And so now we're still just holding the strain as opposed to there could have been a different approach. Additionally, previous to this particular situation as it relates to the war, the conflict, I'm not even sure I want to call it a war, the conflict in Iran, is that prices had already started to trend upwards. And so the government revisited the whole application of the CET. I'm not sure if Angola would have benefited from that, but there was a general relook at the application of the common external tariff for goods coming in from the region and coming from, of course, beyond our CARICOM region. And so there was an adjustment in the CET on goods coming out extra regionally, in particular for food items. And so the cost of food, because those goods already would be attracting zero rated in within the region. Outside of the region, there were taxes applied. Those taxes have been removed, and that has resulted in a significant drop in the price of food, which was spiraling. The inflation rate was well over 7, 8% for food, and so that has scaled back. Also, they've expanded the welfare services component. We would have had from their social transformation unit, there would have been a number of welfare packages for the elderly, for single mothers, for families that are at indigent level, close to poverty line. And so all of those services have been expanded in terms of offering support services. This is what has been done. Also, one has to be mindful, as Dr. Fai said earlier, that anything that you do, it has consequences. You're either running down your reserves or you're going to have to look at where do you find the money, the resources to ensure that you not only maintain the new services that you're adding, but to maintain the services on a whole in the government service. And so on the supply side, the government has been tightening up on its tax compliance and not increasing the taxes, but ensuring that the taxes to be collected, that there's a higher rate of enforcement on that level. And that is particularly significant for us in the self-employed sector and, of course, in tourism-related services. So I think that's a generally broad gist of the majority of what has been done in the last, say, not just recent times, but before in perhaps the last 8 to 12 months.
It seemed as if the government of Antigua is doing quite a lot to mitigate against all of these issues. But you spoke about the minimum wage, and the minimum wage have been increased to $13 and what?
To 11.50. The recommendation was 13.50, but it's gone
Right.
to 11.50, yes, per
So the
hour.
minimum wage was recommended to 13.50, but it's
Yeah.
gone to 11. Now,
11.50, yes.
under Dr. Webster's government, the minimum wage, Angola never had a minimum wage ever in its history. But under Dr. Webster's government, a minimum wage of $6 an hour, which is what, 16 something, was
Yes.
implemented. So that's
Uh-huh.
the existing minimum wage in
In
Angola.
Angola,
Um,
right.
Dr. Webster, uh, the minimum wage, when the minimum wage was implemented, the then opposition, the now government, said it was too low. They have been in office for over a year and they have not addressed the minimum wage in any meaningful way whatsoever. They have not addressed it at all. As a matter of fact, your administration, Dr. Webster, also put in place a pension committee to provide pensions for all Anguillians, including construction workers, mechanics, hospitality workers, and so forth. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Fire might have been on that pension committee, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. But that committee has been disbanded by this administration. You or Dr. Fire can jump in on this.
Well, you mentioned the pension committee, but don't forget the minimum wage committee.
Yes, you are on the minimum wage committee as well. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
Ms. Williams, you see our minimum wage is what, 16 something an hour?
yeah,
So,
620
yeah.
US hour.
Mhm. Yes.
So one of the recommendations that came out from the minimum wage committee was a review after 1 year. That was one of the recommendations. And well, that has not happened. But in terms of the minimum wage, let's look carefully at the impact of an increase or decrease. If what's happening currently has a negative impact on the GDP in Angola, right? Where you're not growing, right? It's not a straightforward case
Right.
to increase the minimum wage at this point, to be really honest with you. If productivity is going to decrease as a result of what's going on in the Middle East and in Venezuela, and the increases in transport costs and all that causing goods to go up and prices to go up, people spending less, economic activity not being robust as it could be, we have to be a careful decision to go to increase the minimum wage. Might be a popular decision, might be a popular statement, but we got to face reality sometimes.
Doc, I tend to take a little different approach than you have. Maybe because I was on the inside just recently, So one of the things that we found, and thank you for being on the minimum wage committee and then on the private pensions committee that was set up by former Minister Hodge. We felt that the minimum wage was a start. And then it was across the board. But then we thought that after that year of evaluation of the $16.20 EC per hour, that we look at it again in terms of more moving towards a livable wage. And we feel that a livable wage would be certainly higher than the minimum wage that we started at, given the circumstances, the cost of living, and then looking at all those factors. The other aspect of that, I think, is that we were thinking maybe we look at it from a sectoral standpoint, looking at different sectors and the wages being, started in that and looked at in that manner. But I do feel that it is necessary, especially now as the cost of living goes up, that we have to be cognizant that our people have to survive. And we do know that when we left office, there were significant reserves. The .ai domain name registration revenue was up, and the current administration is boasting about bringing in over $231 million in 2025. We had budgeted for about 190 million. And so it's good to see that continues to be robust, and should thank our administration for making sure that the marketing and the global outreach has significantly increased because of decisions made by our administration, which again were negatively looked at by the current administration when they were in opposition. So I do not agree that we shouldn't look at these things, critically and consider raising our minimum wage, because the cost of living in Anguilla has gone up, and it has gone up astronomically because of certain decisions regarding the goods and service tax. Now, the revenue from the goods and service tax, was a predictable source of revenue, and therefore policies could be brought in based on that. And so some of these relief packages, some of which I have proposed and some of which we implemented prior with the electricity credits and the vouchers for the seniors, for food vouchers, increasing public assistance by 25% across for those who are needy and vulnerable. And these were things that were done and continue to need to be done. So I think that the revenue that is coming in from Dot AI, we were planning on doing a sovereign wealth fund, a national fund. But that right now, given where we are, we need to look at how we can utilize some of those revenues to help our people to make it through this time, because we don't know how long this is going to last. And that those are the issues that we face. Now, in terms of the private pension committee, which was then set up by former Minister Hodge, this was to look at now all Anguillians, because we do have the Public Service Pension Fund. And so the public servants do know that they are paid, this is being paid into. And we had the actuarial studies that showed what needed to be done, and the contributions had to increase by 0.25% for the employees per year for the 4 years. We do know a private pension fund would help those, the hospitality workers, especially those who work for 20, 30, 40 years, laboring in the hotels industries, and then they go home with little or no severance at the end of that time. And so we felt it was necessary. And I think even now, more so than ever, this is necessary to look into. But in terms of stimulus package, I think we do know that we have the reserves, which we will need to tap into now to help our people along until we know where things are going to be in terms of making sure they can pay for the electricity, because those costs are going to go up because the cost of fuel is going up. We know that the cost of food on the shelves has gone up. We have to then make sure that government can provide some relief, and some that I proposed are practical steps, reducing the duties, capping freight so that we're not, the CIF values where duties are paid, that as the freight goes up, that goes up. If we cap the freight and take the hit as government, then we make that up at the end, because as you limit the duties, there'll be more imports, and as you get more imports, then you're going to get more revenue. But you can keep the costs down, and then we also have to help businesses. Now, we always felt that businesses drive the economy in Anguilla, and they have to be preserved. And the goods and service tax, prior to the goods tax and the general services tax, which came in 2025, it didn't impact businesses because they could claim back whatever they spent on GST. Whether it was paid at the port, they got that back the following month, or they got credit for it, or the the services that they paid, they were able to claim back that 13% on all the services. So I think that was supposed to help businesses to know that they would not have this artificial increase in their cost of doing business, which they then had to pass on to everyone.
While you're on the mic,
Yeah.
I just want to ask you a question as it relates to the pension. Either you or Dr. Fay can jump in on this too, as it relates to the pension, because the plan was similar to what we did with minimum wage, because Angola has never had a minimum wage in its history. And Angolians who work in the hospitality sector and those who work in construction have never enjoyed, taxi drivers and so forth, have never enjoyed a pension. Why do you think that this administration disbanded and eliminated that aspect of social development? Because it's part really social development. Why do you think that? One of you can jump in on that.
Well, I'll start, and then we can hear from Dr. Foy, because he has been intimately involved with both the minimum wage committee and now the private pension committee, which didn't get off to the start we wanted. I would say that this administration has, they've always talked a lot but never been able to act, and that seems to be the inertia that occurs with this specific political party and its administrations. And we noticed from 2000 to 2010 from 2015 to 2020 and from 2025 and to current. I have no idea why they wouldn't have continued the minimum wage committee, because they knew that the proposal was to reevaluate after 1 year and then see what can be done. So that would have been something that they could have continued. Uh, they did say that they paused, they reassessed, and then they reprioritized. And I guess the living standards of the people of Anguilla was not a priority. They would rather put $16 million into a house in London, which I don't know how that helps the people in Anguilla. Uh, Secondly, in terms of the private pension, I know that several of their supporters uh, were not keen on moving forward with the private pensions, because they felt that some of the businesses felt that they would have to contribute to it. And that is necessary. When you setting up a pension fund, you have to have contributions from employees and from employers. And I do know that some of their supporters who were business persons were opposed to that proposal. Now, in terms of hospitality, we know that there was a suggestion that maybe some of the service charge could pay the employee's contribution to a private pension fund. So that is something that the committee would have looked into had it gotten off the ground. And in terms of the other private areas, the bank, the attorneys, businesses, I think that they could have been a good source to provide when Anguillians uh, retire, that they have a source of pension, not just relying on the Social Security Fund. Again, another area which in previous AUF administrations, the Social Security Fund was like a piggy bank. And we've heard that before. And basically, during our administration, the actuarial studies showed that we had to raise the contribution levels so that we could preserve Social Security for the people of Anguilla now and in the future.
Well,
The suggestion, Dr. Webster, the suggestion of the removal of the USL for employees and employers was there, which would have provided an additional 3% in the pockets of the employees. But as it relates to the employers, that 3% could have gone towards the pension fund.
Certainly,
What?
yeah, that is certainly something. I mean, we just came up with this as one of the stopgap measures, but certainly in hindsight, we that is something that's an area we're getting about $20 million a year, makes up the USL. That could have been a good start. One, we were looking at it as a start for the National Health Insurance Fund. But also, you could look at a portion of that going into a private pension fund. And certainly now, if we were to suspend the USL, every working person in Anguilla that pays the 3% now would have that 3% in their pockets so that they can spend. And I wouldn't say discretionary money, because we realize that is what is needed now to provide food and to pay for electricity and to pay for healthcare costs in and out of Anguilla. So these are all costs that those don't go away. Those are costs that we have to continue to bear that burden, and it would be good for persons to have that extra money so that they can use it for survival. And that's how I look at it. We are resilient people, but we still need to be able to survive. I know Dr. Foy had wanted to say something, so I
Yeah, I
won't
was just about
take
to
up
ask
his
him
time.
about his view as it relates to the pension fund as well.
yeah, well, I can't speak for the government, but what I would say is, no analysis was done that came up with shortcomings in the amount of work that we did so far, and nothing negative was said to the committee that y'all are useless, so we're disbanding. What we heard would have been like we plan to move in another direction. So thanks for your time, and here's your pay. Bye-bye.
Could I say something?
Yes, of course. Jump in at any time.
Listening to the conversation on Anguilla, one of the challenges I think we face as small island countries is, well, two challenges. One, the issue of continuity across administrations, in particular of policies that are sound or in planning for the long-term development of our economies. So, for example, a minimum wage, a living wage, a cost of living index, a poverty index, censuses, all of these are critical components of national economic planning and long-term planning, and having data that you can rely on, especially when we come to points like these in our economy where external factors are influencing us. And we still, at this stage of our respective island development, are not comfortable enough to know that regardless of the administration, these are core basic necessities that we need to have for effective planning. And I think these sorts of limitations leave us additionally vulnerable when we come upon times like these. So, for example, we know cost of living is going up because we can see the prices going up. We would have our CPI baskets. I am not sure if Anguilla's CPI basket is up to date. I know there are a few challenges with our CPI basket in Antigua, but we do not have the benefit of a cost of living analysis, which allows us to be able to know how the minimum wage should move, or what is this living wage and how it's moving, so that when we begin to think of issues such as, for example, the kind of policies we need to implement from the welfare system, if we know what the living wage is, if we know what subsidies we provide already to the education service sector, if we know what subsidies we provide to the health services sector, I'm just looking at those two as key. And if we know the kind of support we underwrite via subsidies and exemptions to our small business sector, it will then give us a better footing on which, for example, some of the policies that Mr. Webster is laying out, that he laid out in his presentation last night, I listened, in that he is making some very valid points in terms of what we can do, but without the grounding and the foundation so that we can have a scientific, a firm grounding as to one, how it will impact, and two, what will it cost the government in terms of, yes, the reserves are there. In Antigua, yes, we have the CIP funds, but what is the cost? Because we, at some point in the long term, we have to look at the replacement cost or replacing the funds that we're utilizing for very important and critical issues such as subsidizing the cost of living today.
I just wanted to jump back in there again, not to take up the time of the learned economists because they are the experts, but we were working towards that. And one of the ways we are going to do that is looking at the Public Service Comprehensive Compensation Review. We felt that, and this is ongoing, that we're looking at the public servants in terms of their salaries and what, with the cost of living as it is, the consultants would be looking at what their salaries should be. Now, the feeling was that we could then extrapolate that data that the consultants came up with pertaining to public servants' salary review. And when they proposed that this is what the salaries should be, then we can say, okay, let's extrapolate that now to the other, 3,000, 4,000 workers in Anguilla, and then now adjust whether it's the minimum wage adjusted by sector, or it's other areas where we can then have the economy growing at such a rate. And we know that during the APM administration, that our economy was growing at a significant rate compared to the other members of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. And so we could then say not only the public servants' boat rises, but all the other boats rise, including the small boats, because if you remember, uh, Minister Hughes, during our administration, we made sure that everyone got a boost in their salaries. The healthcare workers, we paid them the back pay all the way back, that where their salaries were cut in 2008, 2009, but all the way down to cleaners and our early education teachers. We made sure that they got an uplift in their salaries. And so you can see that the trend was we wanted everyone to have a chance to survive in Anguilla. And I think that, you know, when Ms. Williams, you laid out what was happening in Antigua, you see that there also decisions are being made to help everybody to get up to a certain level of standard that is acceptable. Now, everybody can't be at the same level because, you know, education, the technical components of each job have to be catered for. And that was also part of the public service comprehensive compensation review, that certain persons, such as our healthcare workers, would have to be paid for their technical abilities. You can't pay a general secretary the same as you pay a nurse. And so, so our wage differences classifications would be based on training, on the job classifications and the job qualifications. So these are all areas that were being looked at, but being done in a stepwise manner to make sure. And so we still need to continue that. And I am really befuddled and confused, or as some people say, befused and confuddled, that this administration has not seen the necessity to get these moving forward so that the country and the people can feel that government is working for them.
Dr. Webster, Dr. Foy, you are the economist. Any one of you can jump in on this. There was a number of public infrastructure projects that was rolled out for 2025 by yourself. They included road development, they were included port enhancements, they included airport development that would have the extension of the runway would have started in May, June of 2025. It included a government administration billing that would have cost somewhere in the region of $90 million with a first tranche of $10 million. It included renewable energy integration. And it followed up from a number of projects that were done previously. So it wasn't a situation where you could have say it was electioneering, because the record of 2020 to 2025 showed that the Anguilla Progressive Movement was moving forward with a number of these projects. When the Anguilla United Front came to office in 2025, the Premier and her administration decided to pause all of these projects, to hold all of these projects, to put away all these projects, some of them eliminated altogether. What impact do you think that would have had on the entire economy?
Well, government spending is a critical component of economic growth, right? C plus I plus B plus net exports. So if they were supposed to be implemented and were not, right, that area of economic growth went down the drain. And the multiplied effect of the income that activity would have generated also gone down the drain. So the reality would be that the economy was adversely affected by the non-implementation of these projects.
I agree with you, Doc, wholeheartedly. If you think about it, when the new airport terminal was being built, there were over 150 workers on that project, which is 1% of Anguilla's population, essentially, if we still had 15,000. I know the census said we have about 12,700 people living in Anguilla now. So our population is decreasing. If you imagine that we had the airport runway going, we had the TVET center at the high school going, we had the roads continuing as were proposed for, as were budgeted for, and paid for. If we had the government building in 2025, we would have spent $10 million on the government administration buildings, with another 80 million to go over 26 and 2027. Just imagine how many people would be working. And not only that the persons would be working on these government funded projects and the money was there. It's not like we were borrowing the money to do these projects that was budgeted for. Think about how many persons now could finish their houses, that would be building new houses, that would be starting businesses. The effect of these government spending um, and economic growth would have not only been additional, but it would have been exponential. The geometric progression of it, everybody in Anguilla who wanted to work would have been working. And you know that under the APM administration, there was a time when persons in construction couldn't find any workers because everybody was employed that wanted to be employed, and they had to start looking at importing labor, skilled labor and other labor. And so that's what you need to have an economy growing robustly. You can't stop things just for political reasons. You can't, as the premier said, pause and then reassess and reprioritize when these projects were good for the people of Anguilla to provide jobs, to provide to stimulate the economy, and to make sure that Anguillians who live abroad could come back home and provide the skills that they have acquired abroad to help develop Anguilla and its people. And then you would have our social programs would then be able to be funded, but also to have mentors for our young men especially, and so that they would move away from lives of crime and violence towards wanting to be provide and produce in the society. So these are the things that it is an add-on effect that because the economy has slowed down, we have now seen increase in social decline.
And just like the injections into the economy would have a multiplier effect, the fact that it didn't happen is a movement in the opposite direction.
Correct. That's mathematics, right? You're correct. Yeah.
But as you said, that's that part of it is for you and Hayden and Prince to duke it out in the House of Assembly. That part of
Thank you.
it.
When we get into things like CARICOM, because I'm really disappointed and the way CARICOM is dealing with not only this crisis, but just our integration and our economic. I mean, we have such in the region. If we were united, there's such a multiplier effect that we could have. And I think that the populations of all our countries, if we were moving together, we would be a force to reckon with. I don't see it happening.
Let me
So do
ask a
we,
question. Let me ask a question, Petro, and as
yes.
it relates to CARICOM, because we know we had the West Indies Federation, and Trinidad decided many years ago, 1 from 10 leaves 0, and pull out of the West Indies Federation. The West Indies Federation,
Jamaica.
sorry,
Yes.
Jamaica, and the West Indies Federation collapsed.
Mhm.
That was ill-advised, but what I've found while countries are trying to pull together, like the European Union, for example, and even, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and Muammar Gaddafi, folks say they're trying to have a United States of Africa. And you see these countries pulling together. We've talked about CARICOM for so long. Why is it that in the Caribbean, we still cannot move forward CARICOM in terms of regional integration and providing goods and services across the CARICOM member states and more meaningful impact of CARICOM for the people of the region?
Well, I like to begin any regional list conversations at the OECS level. I
Yeah.
know CARICOM is the big picture, but for me, I think a stronger OECS going into CARICOM is what we need to look for. And we have so many things in common. We almost, I have to say almost, I know legally we have free movement in the OECS, but we really don't. The kind of questions you get asked at the border, it's still disappointment. But as at the OECS level, we have a number of things that we are doing well from a unitary perspective that perhaps sometimes John and Jane and Petra and Fai and so on are not either sharing or fully au fait with. So I think from when we begin to have the regional conversations, if we look at the OECS level and look at what are the structural rigidities that we have that limits what we can do. None of our islands have significant primary industries. Very few have one or two. Dominica has primary industries that they're now really beginning to cultivate and push ahead with their thermal energy. Um, the Windward Islands have agriculture, which struggles. It's in a transitional state. It struggles. It does a decent job of feeding most of the other OECS islands to some extent, but there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of our agriculture as we move as an OECS region. And perhaps the biggest challenge for us in the OECS is travel and the level of taxes that we apply to intra-regional travel with reason. I know we fuss about the level of taxes, but those taxes sustain and maintain our airport infrastructure. And so we have to find creative ways as this sub-region, first and foremost, the OECS sub-region, to get our ducks in a row so that we can be a stronger unit. Some of the challenges we still face, for example, is our foreign policy. While we act as a single economy, we reserve the right, each country, to have our own foreign policy stance. And in the case of Anguilla, of course, your foreign policy would be coordinated with UK. And so that leaves us vulnerable because then we can't take a single position as it relates to engaging extra OECS to our benefit. So some of us are with China, others are with Taiwan, others are nowhere. And so in terms of how we negotiate from a position of the little strength, and I emphasize little strength because there's so much that we don't have, that we are at a natural disadvantage in terms of our defense systems. We are small islands with hundreds of beaches in terms of just securing ourselves in matters of drug interdiction, transshipment of drugs. We are small economies in terms of our dependence on tourism. When America invaded Venezuela for that temporary period and closed the regional airspace to American flights, we were all impacted because tourists from America, our largest source market in the OECS, could not move, and we were impacted. So if they were to prolong that, how are we, or having seen that happen, how have we as the OECS looked at perhaps a collective tourism plan so that we can begin to do a better job of diversifying our markets to make us a little bit more resilient should America finds the need to adjust how it treats with us for air travel. And that is not something that is far-fetched because we see there are so many things that America has set its mind to in terms of its own policies that could impact us as very insignificant almost people to the United States and even Canada and Europe and everywhere else. How are we diversifying and how are we looking at it as the sub-region? So I understand you asked me about CARICOM, which I'll address just now, but I wanted to lay those matters on the table from a sub-regional perspective. And to add
Yeah.
a very important one, we act collectively with monetary policy. I note that Dr. Webster, he spoke about Anguilla's reserves and how that is being utilized for Anguilla. But we act collectively with monetary policy. And within that collectivity, we have reserves. We have a very strong, personally, I feel we have overdone it for too long in terms of the reserves we're using to back our currency. I think we can shave some of it to do some infrastructural development regionally, perhaps look at our regional transportation sector and so on. But when are we going to begin to look at issues such as those, issues of venture capital and so on, to make our sub-region more dynamic, more resilient, and then we can have a different kind of impact now on CARICOM because we have the majority in terms of membership. We don't have the majority in terms of population, but we are significant importers of goods from our CARICOM brothers and sisters. We import from Jamaica, we import from Trinidad, and we import from Guyana, and we are preferred markets, significant markets for them, generating significant employment in their economy. How have we benefited as smaller states in that big picture? And those are
Well,
some of the critical issues for me.
yeah, but also, I have to ask this question, and it may be a controversial question, but I see it a lot through the Caribbean. What impact does xenophobia in the Caribbean has on all of this?
If you want so xenophobia for me it's very interesting use because I think it's we are xenophobic by convenience. We all acknowledge, especially the smaller islands, that we need the labor from our bigger brothers and sisters. We acknowledge that having them in our smaller economies, especially where our locals have migrated to greener pastures internationally, the United States, the UK, the France, and so on. So we understand and accept the value of our colleagues into our countries for the economic value. But at times, when there's elections, when there is a burst of crime and it's committed by sometimes it's not even by the very few people who want to be xenophobic too, but because we may associate certain types of behaviors with certain types of people, then the xenophobia pops up. So it's a matter to me of more education. And we're often xenophobic to our own hue because it's not just Caribbean people we're xenophobic too. We also do it to our African brothers and sisters. And for me, that is a legacy, a centuries old legacy that we are still working to break, which for me begins with education. And it begins with education at the school level for us to learn even more, yes, even more about each other. And it's an education that to remind ourselves that Black Friday is a good thing and black magic is a good thing, and those to have those kind of conversations which would then n- positively impact how we engage with each other and reduce the incidences of xenophobia because we are never xenophobic to the people that are lighter than us. We
Yeah,
call our people we tell our people they wash their foot and come out in our country, they bang water come, and then we call those of a lighter few the expats. There's just the whole concepts that we use to describe each other and to this across the board. We need to begin to standardize those sort of things and actively and consciously address it. If we don't, xenophobia will always be with us
yeah,
at a large level.
yeah. I want to ask. I almost forgot that. Um, we recently changed our tax structure, and I want to go to Courtney here a minute because we had a system of taxation called the GSC, Goods and Services Tax. It's similar to value added tax in some of those countries, some of those other islands. But in our case, it was 13%. And the businesses that were signatory to value added tax or the GSC, they could do a claim back on their services and so forth. And the new administration, well, they're not so new now, but when they came to office, they said that they were going to provide relief to the people by removing the goods and services tax. And Courtney, they have implemented two new taxes. One is a goods tax, and one is a general services tax, GST, of 13% with no claim back. How has that impacted the consumer, and has that impacted businesses on a whole in Ecuador?
Well, good night. That have impacted consumers no matter big way. We are seeing the prices on the shelves change on the shelf. Um, I've done some research on a paper published by Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, and it's the Annual Economic Financial Review of Angola 2025. And as I perused that document on page 11, the appendices, they make a note on the Angular tax structure policy changes. And it says on August 1st, 2025, the Goods and Service Tax GST Relief Plan took effect, repealing GST on goods on 5 sectors, namely restaurants, entertainment, manufacturing, wholesale, and retail. The repealed tax was renamed Goods Service Tax, General Service Tax, sorry, as it should only be applied to services. Repealing the 13% and replacing it with 9%, this tax will be applied to all goods with no claim back provisions. So for example, on the supermarkets who could have claimed back on the utility bill will now see a further spreading of that expense across the board on goods. And that goes across on almost every item on the shelf that we consume. It further states that a relief plan is estimated to relieve 21%. It's estimating the result of 21% in a reduction of revenue. So by removing the 13%, putting the 9%, and not removing GST off of certain items like utility bills and stuff like that, it creates a domino effect where now you are seeing a decrease in the revenues by 21%. But because .ai is performing above par, as I say, we are not feeling that effect as yet. But we know that .ai is a volatile product. It could goes up today. You see a big increase in today's pricing on this month pricing, and next month those prices could reduce. So we're in a kind of sticky situation here where the prices have increased tremendously, and we are now trying to cap prices with the revenue generated from .ai.
In terms of .ai, and I've often said that if we receive $1 billion from .ai and it goes into government coffers, but we receive $200 million, for example, from tourism, the $200 million from tourism have a greater impact on the people's pocket than .ai. So in the case of .ai, even though the Angola Progressive Movement did a lot of measures, including placing the on tender to ensure that we can maximize the revenue from it, that is going to government's coffers. But government in turn is not distributing that to the people because the Angola Progressive Movement, they would give frequent electricity credits. So, Peter, what the Angola Progressive Movement under the leadership of Dr. Webster would do is that not only they would provide double salaries to public servants at the end of the year, but they will also give $500 electricity credits for over 6,000 users multiple times a year. And that also have an impact on people's pockets. Also, seniors over the age of 70 would be provided with $500 food vouchers that they can go to the grocery store and purchase up to $500 in food from those things. So I think that would be a better use in order to put money in people's pocket rather than just hoard it and boast that you're making $200 million, $250 million. Because the reality is you're making that money because of the Angola Progressive Movement. Because when we came to office, there was somebody who was managing .ai. And we know for a fact that all of those monies have not been remitted to the government of Angola. So yes, .ai may be performing, but you still need to ensure that the people have some relief. And the people have not had that relief. The people have actually paid more at the store. As a matter of fact, the Minister of Economic Development just said, well, the shop owners can just spread the costs among all the items. If you spread the cost, it means you're going to pay more anyway. Anybody can jump in.
Everybody's quiet.
Well,
I
you
mean-
did. Okay, you go ahead,
No,
Petra.
sorry, you go ahead, Dr. Webster.
Yeah, just a couple of things that was said there. You mentioned, Mr. Hughes, about that if you made 200 million from tourism and $1 billion from AI, that the 200 million from tourism would have a greater impact. And you're correct, because just that monies would have passed through so many different persons in Anguilla who would benefit from that, whether it's the restaurateurs or it's the taxi drivers, it's the hospitality workers. That would touch a bigger part of the population than the .ai revenue that basically comes into the government coffers. Now, government now has the ability to utilize a portion of those funds to help. And certainly the electricity credits were helpful, and the people have been asking. Now, this administration has stated that they don't give handouts. But as I said, these are hand ups, not handouts, because they help persons, especially in this time when the cost of living is going up and the cost of certain services are going up, that they can afford these services, which they've become accustomed to. And then, because they now have more money in their pockets, they can then spread that out into other areas in the economy. So that's how you have that ripple effect. And I think that Anguilla in the last year and a month has lost that ripple effect that was seen through the Anguillan economy from 2022 onward. And we need to get back to that where the government has to be for the people and of the people. And we don't see that happening. So these are the areas, as you said, that need to be touched. It's not that you're just giving out money. I mean, look at Guyana. When Guyana found oil, the Guyanese government said every Guyanese person should get, I think it was 1,000. I think it was like 200,000. Somewhere the number came out to about 996 US dollars per person. That helps. I mean, back in 2020, we were given 1,000 EC dollars a month to persons just to keep them going. And we knew that wasn't enough to keep the economy going, but it was necessary to keep things going while we figured out how to get funding to keep government going, to keep services available. Remember, when we came in, there was a $97.1 million deficit. And
Okay.
and we were able then, with the help of the UK government. So we have to thank the UK government, our administering power, because they provided the 100 million EC dollars or access to it to keep Anguilla going, to provide services, to protect the lives of people by being able to protect them from COVID. And we know what was happening in Anguilla and the rest of the world during COVID. And so we don't look at that, that was necessary. With that came the goods and service tax. But then to see the dismantling of that goods and service tax back in August 1 of 2025, which has basically put Anguilla's economy in a free fall. Because one, it was stated that there would be $73 million deficit in the budget because of this undermining of the goods and service tax that was done. So you already taken out $73 million in revenue. And then that $73 million didn't translate into $73 million going into the pockets of Anguillians. That was just money basically that unaccounted for. And so that's what happens when you slow down an economy. You basically, with that comes the negative multiplier effect. And so you know that back in 2010, there was what was it, a negative 16, no, negative 16.9% growth in Anguilla, negative. And by 2015, that had gone back up to positive growth. And then in 2020, we came in and there was a negative 30% decline in the economy. Some of it had to do with Hurricane Irma in 2017 and some with the COVID in 2020. But it just has to do with the administration and their lack of vision and foresight. And so now we are just suggesting what can be done. Dr. Foy said that you and I, we are the politicians, so we have to deal with it. So I'm dealing with it. We laid it on the table tonight. And certainly politics is necessary because elections have consequences. And if our leaders that have been elected don't see the way forward, and we have to point out things, and it's up to them now to choose what they will do. But I think that the people have to watch and listen and see what steps the government has taken to help them during these times of crises.
Dr. Webster, the now government, when they were in opposition, they said that your administration was doing too much too fast. Don't you think that because of the view that we were actually doing too much, it had to cause the decision to slow things down, to pause, to stop the economy?
Yes, I mean that they did, and I mean they didn't hide the fact that they paused the economy, right? It has been stated in the budget speech of the 2026 that they paused, they reassessed, they reprioritized, but it has taken them because they paused. It's now they're stuck in mud. The wheels are turning, but they're not moving any direction forward. And so it just becomes a decline on the economy, a decline in the standard of living for the people of Anguilla, and a decline in the businesses. We see that businesses that were in Anguilla 30, 40 years are now shuttering, right? I mean, we see restaurants that are announcing this. We see that the other businesses that are closing down, the mom and pop shops that were able to keep small communities going, they are shutting their doors or they're selling out because of what is happening right now in Anguilla because of this pause that was implemented by the current AUF administration. So it is something that we have to be cognizant of, and the people have to see that who was looking out for their best interests and who continues to stand in the gap for them, even though as opposition we don't have any power. And that is a problem of most of our island states and
When it
countries is
takes it
that
all.
the winner takes it all, and then the rest fall, and then the country goes based on how things go. So that's where we're at right now. I know, Petra, you had wanted to get in on the previous question, so I'll give you the floor.
I don't remember my thoughts. Sorry. Go ahead. I didn't note, but I don't remember.
I got
That's a
you.
question, though, Petra, and this is a political question as it relates to Antigua, because the Gaston Brown administration has been in now, what, for 3 terms? Three
Yeah.
consecutive terms, correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong?
3 terms are closed, yes.
Yeah, 3 terms. What are the prospects of them doing a 4th term?
The prospects are strong. So last election, the opposition came within striking distance, 1 seat and 6 votes of taking the government. But they say almost doesn't count. And so now, in that interim, the opposition did not hold itself together. It crumbled badly. They had lots of resignations. One key member in parliament moved to independent, moved his chair, and actually joined the cabinet of the Gaston Brown administration. He, no surprise, will be running on that ticket in a few weeks when it happens. So presently, the opposition is struggling to line up behind its leadership. It's struggling to gain candidates in some of the seats. And so there's a very strong likelihood that the Labour Party administration will be returned in Antigua when the elections are called.
Very interesting. Dr. Webster, Dr. Fay, Courtney. Now, Dr. Fay and Courtney have the dubious distinction of both having served on the ANGLEC board. And Dr. Webster, I want you as Minister of Finance to chime in on this as well, because we hear of the ANGLEC board borrowing money from the Caribbean Development Bank for renewable energy integration. And we had a plan for total renewable energy integration using the public purchase agreement. Now, there was a program recently that was done by Joseph Vanderpool, who's the Minister of ANGLEC, Minister of Responsibility for ANGLEC, and David Carty, who is the chairman of the board. And they said that the government of Anguilla did not need, ANGLEC did not need government sign-on to go and borrow the money and so forth, because it didn't even get the guarantee from the British government, because there's no contingent liability. But one of the things that this administration have benefited from significantly, Dr. Webster, is the prudence that you manage the country finances under. because there's a framework for fiscal responsibility. And Dr. Fay, you can speak about the framework. I want Dr. Fay to explain what a framework for fiscal responsibility is all about. And Dr. Webster, you can talk about the ratios and how now this government is benefiting from that, so they don't need to have these type of guarantees from the British government. In
So
it, and Courtney, you can chime in as well as it relates to all of this as well.
the framework for fiscal responsibility would be more or less the do's and don'ts in financial dealing. So I would consider the framework would be guidelines like from the ECCB and the OECS and the British government, and what you're borrowing, what are the conditions for your borrowing, and that sort of stuff. And if certain thresholds would have to be met before you can borrow, and certain thresholds got to be maintained in terms of your revenue and your revenue to debt ratios and that kind of stuff.
So yeah, and that's what basically handicapped us throughout our administration, wasn't it? When we came in, basically the three borrowing guidelines, which were passed in 2013 by the government of Anguilla at the time. I mean, basically forced upon by the UK government, was that your debt couldn't be more than 80% of your current revenue. Your debt service couldn't be more than 10% of your current revenue. And you had to have in reserves 25% or 3 months of your recurrent expenditure. Now, when we came in, none of those guidelines were met, right? I mean, debt at that time was 174% of the recurrent revenue. The reserves were $500,000, which was less than 1 day of the recurrent expenditure. And our debt service at that time was almost 30%. It was at 29% at that time. Because of our prudent management of the public purse, we were able then to get to where we had already met two of those guidelines, and then within months we would have been able to make the third one. And what the importance of that is that once you met those three guidelines, we as a government did not need to get the United Kingdom to approve our budgets. Remember that you had to have a medium-term economic fiscal plan that covered 3 years, every 3 years, but it had to be done every year, updated every year for 3 years in a row, of what your revenue would be, what your revenue sources would be, what your expenditure would be, what your policies would be. That had to be approved by the UK government. And your budgets had to be approved by the UK government before they could go through Executive Council and go to the House of Assembly. Now meeting those guidelines, you don't have to. So back when we were proposing a full transition to renewable energy, and we were telling ANGLEC that we would like to see this happen, or discussing with ANGLEC, because even though the government owns 79% of ANGLEC, it was like if once the board was formed, government was then pushed to the side in terms of what was needed in terms of a national policy on electricity generation. And so when ANGLEC proposed that they wanted to do an 8 megawatt field, and we were suggesting that they should do a 30 megawatt transition for renewable energy, since we use about 16 to 17 megawatts of power in Anguilla. And we knew that there were other projects coming on stream, big hotels, the marina, and things. We felt that we should have a buffer. And we said, because the efficiency of, say, solar is only about 65 to 70%, you need to have almost double the amount of megawatts in power in solar panels, that to generate the amount of electricity we would need or projected to need. However, one of the requirements is that ANGLEC, as the electricity company, that is one of the areas that's of national importance. Because if Anglec goes under, who has to bail out Anglec? The people of Anguilla through the government of Anguilla. One, as a shareholder, and two, because that has a monopoly for 50 years. And so when the proposal was that Anglec wanted to do 8 megawatts and wanted to borrow from the Caribbean Development Bank to do that, that Anglec then would then have to get government's approval, because we know that the former president of the CDB, Dr. Jean Leon, he came to Anguilla, and at a meeting, he talked about that the CDB only worked with governments, and the government would have to essentially, the entity that was borrowing had to be, sanctioned by the government of that that was over that entity. Secondly, we know that for Anglec to borrow at that time, they had to get government's approval, and government, to be able to approve that, had to get the UK approval, because we had not met those guidelines and we could not accept contingent liability. And if the government accepts any contingent liability, the UK then would assume that contingent liability. And we know from the MOU that was signed by former Premier Victor Banks on June 11 of 2020, and to get access to the $100 million for COVID relief, that one of those conditions was that the government of Anguilla had to decrease contingent liability and decrease arrears. And that required that we had to raise fees for certain entities like the Health Authority, like ASPA, etc. I mean, this is just a look back in a short history, and so and just to emphasize that point, this administration, basically criticized those decisions, but they've been in now for, what is it, 13 months, and they have not made
Over,
any
yeah.
effort they have not made any effort to reduce those fees that were raised back in 2021 and 22, when Anguilla was floundering on the precipice of bankruptcy and falling off the cliff. They haven't. It just shows that it was all political
Politics.
electioneering and posturing, which they haven't done anything for these areas. But I'm just trying to say that when now the minister can boast about that Anglec doesn't need government's approval. Back then, and we sat in executive council and we sat on different committees where we know that the UK would not have given approval for the government to allow Anglec to borrow that money, with the government having to back it in case Anglec could not support to pay back those loans.
But apart from that, Dr. Webster, there was a town hall meeting that was held by David Carter when he was the chairman back then, along with his then CEO, where David Carter said in that town hall meeting that in order for Anglec to move forward with the Caribbean Development Bank, government has to sign on, have to be on board with it.
Well,
You
definitely, but
understand?
that was a
So,
policy of the CDB.
so how is it that just a few nights ago, they are saying, well, government don't have to, given the impression that the government didn't have to back then, but he himself confirmed back then when the framework wasn't reached, when the guidelines wasn't arrived to, that
That's correct.
they would have had to have those sign. This is what baffles me about it. And Anguillians and the media in Anguilla and the press in Anguilla don't hold these people to a higher standard. They should be saying, but you said such and such back then. Why is it that you change it now? There must be a reason. You understand what I'm saying? Like, for example, with Joseph Van der Poel as the Minister of Anglec, he said in November of 2025 that by December 31st, 2025, the Caracas Bay building that they bought, which was a bad decision, would be completed and ready for business. As a matter of fact, he said that it would have started renewable energy integration in January of 2026, because the Caracas Bay building would have been there, and that would have been a catalyst to help to bring about renewable energy integration. So these are the type of decisions that I question, but there's something else that baffles me. So the government of Angola is planning on, I don't want to call it an investment because investment's supposed to have a return on investment. On buying a house in England. To date, they have not justified the reason why they're buying a house in England costing almost $20 million upfront and then on 2 millions ongoing. But there's a lot of people across the island who are saying to me and certainly to other members that instead of government of Angola spending all of this money in England, for whatever reason nobody knows, why don't they do that as a capital injection in Anglic so that Anglic don't have to borrow this money from the Caribbean Development Bank so that the relief for renewable energy can be felt a lot sooner. So instead of doing the 8 megawatts, they can do a bigger expanse and they can bring relief because the 8 megawatts is not going to reduce the cost of electricity to the people of Angola. Anglic
Correct.
already embarked on a 1 megawatt some years ago. In less than a year later, it was totally decimated. What say you?
Yes, I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly, that instead of buying this house in London. And I mean, the thing is, if you need a presence in England, you can rent, and I think that rent, is going to be manageable and affordable. I don't think you need to spend 16, $20 million on a house in London. And if you put that into Anglec, certainly Anglec could move forward with what I think, as you rightfully said, 8 to 12 megawatts is not going to reduce the cost of electricity in Anguilla by any significant amount. I think you have to go for a full integration. Certainly, you'd want to maintain the generators for in case there is the sun doesn't shine for a few days, or you have that as a base. But if we go to full integration, to full renewable energy, then that reduces the cost. And in fact, I've seen a proposal where the cost can come down to about 19 to 20 US cents per kilowatt hour. Right now, we are paying over, because we are paying the fuel surcharge and we are paying a base, and that would be a significant reduction. Less than a quarter of what we're paying now per kilowatt hour in Anguilla. So I think that's important. But we go back to, and you said it, in 2017, the 1 megawatt solar farm was destroyed. Nothing has been done since then. But just think about if Anglec is owning the solar field. You need to have insurance to cover so that in case there is damage, that this has to be replaced. Anglec will have to come up with that type of funding to replace it. Or the government of Angola will have to do it, like we relied on after Hurricane Irma, and the UK government, the Canadian government, and others had to help Anglec to restore electricity throughout the island. And thank God for Minister Curtis Richardson, who said we'd have lights by Christmas, and we did. I am saying that with a PPA, a power purchase agreement, that you'd have a company or developer that would then own the electricity and then sell it at that reduced rate, as I said, 19, 20 cents US per kilowatt hour to the people of Anguilla through Anglec as the distributor. They would be responsible for insurance. They would be responsible for maintenance. They would be responsible to provide that.
All right, I need to jump in there.
Yes.
I think that part of the challenge I think Anglec is probably having, which we would have at APUA and many of our small islands would have, is that the insurance costs associated with covering those things in the event of natural disasters would be prohibitive, especially if we go at it individually, which we
Yes.
are wont to do.
Right.
And this is perhaps another opportunity that we need to look at from an OECS perspective in terms of how do we secure our utilities infrastructure and how do we come together and do insurance against natural disasters and so on from the premise that, well, we are almost all in Hurricane Alley, but
Yes.
invariably we don't all get hit together. I think the lesson for us would be just looking back at what happened in Jamaica just the other day, where only one segment of Jamaica was hit. And so the rest of Jamaica, the insurance risk would have been spread because not the entire infrastructure would have gone down. And so I think that here again is an opportunity as you speak about things like needing to secure our energy infrastructure, things like how we do the renewables, the renewable energy, and the costs that will be associated with moving into renewable energy. Because one of the realities that we have to face is that even as we move into renewable energies, we would still need to maintain some modicum of our traditional energy sources as backup in case
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
case
Right.
it's done. So it's a delicate balancing act that we have to look at. But this is also an area I think that perhaps as a government in waiting, and perhaps as regionalists, that we can begin to remind our governments, our administrations, that there is scope, just as we have done with the our education services sector, just as we've done with our health sector in terms of procurement of pharmaceuticals, that we probably need to look at how we ensure our respective grids in a collective framework so that we can offset some of the risks. Because this is a real serious issue. And
Yes.
also, the other real reality that we need to address is that, again, because of our small size and because of the economies of scale of just starting us up at the size we are, that there's really a minimum below which our respective utility companies cannot go in terms of the cost of electricity. The question becomes, does the government generate sufficient surplus beyond the needs that it has to cover on a regular basis to then seriously look at across the board underwriting a subsidy for the utility sector? How do we, because I know you spoke earlier about the subsidies that are given to certain segments of the society, the $500 subsidy and so on. But is that the most efficient and effective way to transfer the benefit to the community? And then how do we look at the impact on, say, small businesses who, if they were to benefit, could then pass on the benefits through lower costs? Or is it that we're losing some of our businesses in our region, in our in our region, because the costs, some of the infrastructural costs, the fixed cost of operation are really higher than
Mhm.
they can afford to compete? Because it's not just to afford, it is to afford to compete with being able to go online very quickly and order the similar commodities from other places, larger economies that can then ship those goods to us at far cheaper rates, and thus displacing the possibility for expanding, like especially our retail sectors in our small islands. I just wanted to put that as we look at the whole balance in
Yep.
terms of the politics of our economic development and the realities that we face. Because if you were going to government tomorrow, these are still realities that you will have to address.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are the thing is about the things that you just raised is things that we are considering while we were in office. So we are a little bit ahead as it relates to that. Dr. Fai,
You,
I have a question. You know, there's a lot of things that are uncertain at this point, but where do you see the region in the next 3 years?
3 years. Let's go back in 1958, Federation start. Wow, this is 68 years later, right? And 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 you really, really got to hold your courage, right? You had economists like Sir Arthur Lewis and Panton and everybody, right? Over all these years, we're hearing today in 2026. Why I was hearing 30 years ago, and I guess I was hearing in 1958, right? The whole problem with integration and everything, right? We are small developing states, right? But we are special breed, really very, very small, right? Our markets being on our power and in the international market, right? Our power is what we do it in, right?
Mhm.
In what we do it in, don't have no impact on the outside world. While outside world do that has an impact on we, right? We don't influence prices. We really price takers, right? I ain't saying to throw up your hands and say to hell with this, that we can't make it. But sometimes to just test your faith or whatever, right? Because after all these years, right? We back in a situation like in the days of the Monroe Doctrine. You got U.S. intervention. You're back to 1973 when oil prices went up and the shocks coming at you, right? But somehow we only tend to really react when there's a shock. What we don't do, we don't be monitoring and seeing the slow build up of certain things, seeing the increases in prices over the last 5 years. We can see the one that come from the shock right now, but you got to monitor all the way because all you got is your internal policies. I was reading a document that you sent me, really, and see, I come prepared with all that stuff, but we went in a bit of a different direction, but that's okay too. Um, we are in Antigua. In Antigua, well, they did in Antigua, they really did it well, right? Petra, I think I see your name in the article too. Your name was mentioned, right? They were cognizant that you're getting taxes in the United States on Antiguan goods. You're getting a tax there, and you're getting another tax when you come at the port, right?
Right.
So what they did, they eliminate some of that, right? Because what we can't do with our policies is beat ourselves over the head, right? So
Agreed.
if taxes coming in, if taxes raising, and it's hitting the consumers hard, right? And the tax is on cost, insurance, and freight, right? So when the freight go up, right, which is no fault of yours. You don't get no other benefit, but you gotta pay more for it, right? So there's where I look internally and see what I could do. And see
Well,
what
I
I
think
could
that's
do
one
to
of
help.
the proposals by Dr. Webster in terms of the freight, the captain on freight and stuff like
Okay, no problem.
that.
But those are kind of things that you gotta be looking at,
But
right?
in terms of the custom procedure code and the international rules on customs, how realistic is it?
I ain't sure. I ain't sure, but you got laws, and if you truly believe in change, right? You got to push up for change, right?
That's true. Absolutely.
If it didn't have change, I might have been somewhere in the estate now, right? So somebody got to deal with change, right? If you're progressive and all that, it ain't as is, right? And if you're thinking in terms of what it should be, well, you got to walk towards it, right? You got to walk towards it. It is easy to say. It's easy to say we're gonna look inward and let's say decrease our food bill, become self-sufficient in food, right? That sounds good, right?
Mhm.
Um, you're sure the food you're gonna be producing, right, gonna be cheaper than the food you're buying from abroad? You're sure that? When you say that, you're doing the research and find out that remember you're small, right? So you don't get economies of scale. Petra
Right.
mentioned that too. You don't get any economies of scale, right? So you don't get no decrease in your additional costs by volume. All then the things you gotta consider. Because guess what? We ain't gonna move from being small and being open, right? In fact, we ain't gonna move from being very small and being open. Because being open is what has put our food on the table. Being
Mm-hmm.
open is what has get us screwed over too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know? So this is who we are, right? So it ain't a matter of solutions in the traditional sense. It's a matter of developing coping mechanisms. It's like you're born with an ailment and you cope with it all your life and you still live to 90. And you had a successful life, right? So you succeed, you succeed in spite of, and you ain't give up. Oh, because of so and so, it can't happen, right? I've seen another article where they say that nobody coming to save us. You better believe nobody coming to save us. You better believe nobody coming to save us. Think somebody coming to save us? Outside of the charitable organizations, the Red Cross and them, right? When you link up with a country and you got a relationship with a country, is also what in it to that country too. Even like the small independent states, right? If China link up with St. Vincent, well, maybe St. Vincent got to come up with that vote at the United Nations. I don't know. But don't think
Mm-hmm.
it ain't there for nothing, right? So don't you hear all the time how Angola unique? Yeah, Angola unique, but whoever hit the rest of the world gonna hit Angola, right? Because we are classified as a small developing state. Well, small developing country, and we are not Britain now, right? So, but let's just say we were independent for a second, right? We are a small open economy, right? You know who's a small open economy too? Hong Kong, in
Hong
Singapore.
Kong.
In
Yes,
Singapore, we could compare
yes,
with them.
yes.
Huh? Maybe we need to review our definitions. We could compare with them. Singapore got with a say on the international market. Them because of the specialized things that they do, they got a bit of power. What power we got? What policy we could do here in Anguilla, right? That could counteract the increases in our prices. What we could do? We just suspect. We just suspect on the international scene. What we could do is our leaders in the independent countries, when you go to the United Nations, talk your piece, right? Talk your truth. Talk your truth, right? Or no matter what extent you could do your truth in terms of what power you got to do, right? I sure Venezuela, when I talk openly at the last United Nations meeting, Trump say, hey, I'm coming for you. You see the world jump up in the uproar and look to the fender? Hmm? Did they jump up in the uproar and look to the fender? You know, Venezuela gives financial support to certain countries in the Caribbean in different kind of support. You think we're gonna still getting that support? No, they're over, right?
You got no
They're over it, right? So so we, like I say, talk your peace at the international conferences, talk your peace at the United Nations, right? Talk your peace every time. Me and Martley talk your peace, right? Because have your good intentions, right? But I tell you, good intentions and so on, good intentions so in cutting it through for the Caribbean like Caribbean. Petra, I believe in my OECSA. To got a challenges still, but at least we got a record of cooperating. We got our currency, we produce stability. Imagine if Anguilla wasn't on a stable currency, right? And it was floating, independent on the market. What would happen when your currency depreciate? You think this inflation, what you're seeing now, is inflation? What would happen to you? You might have been under long term. So
Yep.
we got a bit to be thankful for. Hold on to us good. The cooperation, the functional cooperation, OECS, with for the pharmaceuticals, and I think disaster preparedness. See if you could build on there, right? See if you could build on there. Jamaica say that it was never a political union. Okay, it was not. What's in the name? Let's see what we could do together still, right? But by the way, we just go CARICOM heads meeting, right? But being a member of the single market
Yeah, yep,
economy.
yeah.
So
You're not missing anything.
what function will be a step trail or something, right? So what? We could go to the meetings when we part of the single economy, right? So you had these different around by talking. You had these different ways, right? You had a wave of independence from colonialism, right? Back in the 50s and 60s, right? All right. Then what coming style was integration, right? Was integration, Carifta, right? And they transformed to the common market and all that, right? And now, 68 years later, right? There's nothing that I say no that I read somewhere when I was in sixth farm, told us 5 something years ago. Okay? And here we are still. So you gotta try to keep the courage, but it's discouraging, right? All these bright Caribbean people, all these big term economists and whatnot that come before me and did good work and did good research, right? And still they're well, see, maybe you're looking for one for one fix. You know what we need? A lot of fixes over and over and over again. Because
I
guess
have a
what?
question. I have a question
Hold on,
now
hold on,
then.
hold on, hold
This
on,
is
hold on, hold on, hold on. Guess what? This is the last shock we're gonna have. This is the last shock we're gonna face. And we're gonna be still small and open. All right, all right, all right, Aiden.
yeah, the question that you raised about all the countries going independent, right? And this is a question for you too, Peter and Courtney If you can jump in on this question, I think it's a question that we have to ask. We are a part of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Well, wherever you go in Angola, when you ask for a price on something, it's in US dollars. US dollars flow more so than EC currency in Angola. Why do you think countries in the Caribbean, when they went into independence, they all decided to create their own currency? The Trinidad, Tobago dollar, the Bajan dollar, and so forth. Why do you think they made the decision to do so when they had the opportunities to be either part of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, one, or two, just use the US dollar? Because
I
it was the American government who went to King Saud in Saudi Arabia and got them to agree to come on to sell all of their oil in US dollars, which created the petrodollar, which helped them to mitigate, to get away from having been on the gold standard. So if they could have done that, why is it that we didn't say, you know what, this US currency is a petrodollar, is a gold standard. Why don't we do that? Or we'll stick with the Eastern Caribbean currency.
well,
It's a question for anybody. Anybody can jump in on that question.
I jump in now. When they went independent, right? You got different schools of thought on the same issue, right? It would have had people who at that time might have been putting forward that a floating exchange rates can be beneficial to you, right? I don't know. Maybe they jump onto that, right? Because we in the ECU area, we come to our one currency, but the ECCU was that came after a lot of them countries went independent, you know. If I think I'm correct in saying that our currency union came into being. Okay, Trinidad and them places would have been independent like from 1962 and whenever, right?
Yeah, and
Our
we were
currency,
1968.
our currency union come to being after,
Yeah.
you know? And so Barbados make some kind of steps like to be part of the OECS. There ain't some kind of affiliation with Barbados.
It's all right. It's okay. They can stay over there. Sorry. I love them, but stay. Don't come. Don't
Okay,
come.
well, so 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 in other words, the rest that didn't come is okay too, right?
So I think to just to pick up on your point, I think we weren't really given a choice as to what currency we would have before independence. The British gave Jamaica their currency before, because Jamaica had their currency before they were independent.
Okay,
Yes. Then Trinidad had their currency before they were independent.
okay.
So I think the British, just like how they eventually told us all, go on your own. You Angola, you're still lucky. They're still holding on to you. I don't know if it's luck or what it
No,
is.
they don't want us going anywhere.
Huh?
They don't want us going anywhere. You see,
Right. So you
time.
came through when they've decided to hold on to something. But
Yes,
for the
yes.
rest of us, it wasn't the case of we went and said, we want to go. No, they gave us statehood early and then they just said, okay, all right, take the
Because
rest, guys. Bye-bye.
at the time they viewed you as a liability. They didn't view
Right,
you as an asset. But
right.
today, if they
Because
were
you
to have
have
you today,
dot
they would not
AI,
give you the, yeah. They wouldn't
right?
do it. They wouldn't do it. They
Well,
wouldn't do it today. The British
So you
well,
government would not.
understand. So just to that's just to look at the point that you made about us having our individual currencies. And so there was an attempt when we had the federation to try and pull it all into one currency again for the British sake of tracking us easier. But again, with the fall away of the federation, that didn't go through. And so the OECS, well, the ECCA, because it was the Eastern Caribbean Currency Authority, the British gave us that because they didn't want us on their pound. Bottom line. And so it's not that we chose what we got. We were given, Barbados was given what they were given. Barbados was split away. Barbados used to be the seat of governance for all of us, and then Barbados was split away, and Antigua became the seat of governance for the Leewards, and I think it was St. Lucia for the Windwards, and then they just lumped us all together and said, take this. So what we have done is basically run with what we were given and made the best of the situation. But just to pick up on what Dr. Fahey was saying, one of the things I wanted to remind us is that Sir Arthur Lewis's work is heralded in Asian countries. One in particular, for the fact, I'm deliberately saying it that way, for the fact that his work, industrialization by invitation and so on, was used to catapult that country into an industrialized state and into a larger economy than, and transform the society, build up the per capita income and so on. There's one key thing that that country had, still has, that the English speaking Caribbean doesn't have. And in fact, maybe only one Caribbean country had, and they got sanctioned from the day they got it. And that is a continuous government. We like our democracy. This is now where the real hard conversation comes in terms of economic growth and development. Our small island, English speaking Caribbean states, we love our democracy. We love that every X number of years we go back to the polls, we have a vote, and the people re elect us. That comes at a significant cost. Policies start, policies vary because you're going to the polls. You have to give the people what they feel they want, not what the national development needs. So while we have a stable democracy, it influences negatively our economic stability. It restricts the ability for long-term planning. And that combined with we are small, open, vulnerable, people's front step, people's back step, you get all of that, means then that this ideal that we strive to in terms of the best national economic development strategy for us individually and collectively, it makes it very, very difficult. Almost a
And
pipe dream.
that is why countries that come up with national development plans over a period of 20 years, um, it doesn't work. It does not work. The only
Yes,
country,
because you have that change of government that just
right,
derails
it does
everything.
not work. You come up with
Right.
a national development plan. And so let me give you an example. The Anguilla United Front, they're in office right now. If they were to say, you know what, we're going to have these consultants develop a national development plan for the next 20 years. They develop the national development plan. It's rolled out in 2027. Elections in 2030. New government comes in. That
No,
national
stop,
development
stop,
plan,
stop, stop. No, you've gone too far. Elections in 2030, they have to derail their own plans because they realize that the long-term nature means that some key goals they need to hit to convince the people to even consider returning them to power, they will have to vary the very plan that they developed. So we don't even get to a change in government. We get to elections is here, and we have to. And I'll show you the classic. I'll use my country as a classic. We have serious challenges with our roads. Antigua has spent the most on road construction per capita in the OECS. I checked. I found all the data and I checked. And so my government came up with a plan. We're going to borrow $100 million and we're going to properly fix the roads this time. A key artery for us is the All Saints Road. It takes you from the city straight out to English Harbor. It's a main artery, and the plan is let's get it right one time. Let's not do a patchwork. Let's not do a rush work. But guess what? Elections is around the corner, and and there are about 7 constituencies that are going to be impacted if that road isn't fixed. Where the people are saying we want that road fixed now. So guess what's happened? We're going to dig into that $100 million, which we should be doing. And by the way, and this is happening for an administration that is highly likely to be returned to power. But just to play it safe and to make sure that there are no hiccups, they are going to do a quick fix of that road, in essence, derailing a long-term development plan. This is not being derailed by a change in government. This is being
yes,
derailed by the need to
yes,
ensure that you stay in government. And so
yes,
I'm pointing this out so that as a people, we understand that this is one of the costs of the democracy that we are very proud of. It
yes,
impacts our ability for effective long-term planning for national economic development. And a classic, it probably if derails efforts to do things like um, effective minimum wage strategies, effective cost of living studies, so that you can then recognize, okay, we have patches that may not be very big, small patches of society in Anguilla that needs adjusting. But when we think about adjusting them, it's election time. So we're gonna throw plaster on their issues because we need to get reelected. And that's a priority, and we have limited resources. I think if we begin to perhaps, and this is a scary thought because politicians in theory say yes, let's do these things, but politicians in practice also want power. Because that's why, let's be fair and let's be real, political parties exist for one reason and one reason only. Well, two reasons, sorry. One, to gain power, two, to keep power. Bottom line. And we should never be under any illusion that it's anything other. Yes, national development will happen, but I want to be the one. My party wants to be the one that leads the national development. That's why I exist. And so, if we find a way to acknowledge that this is the case, but also to perhaps agree on the key tenets of national economic development. So, regardless of which party is in power, these key things will not be impacted. Then maybe we can then begin to have some different conversations. If we can, on a regional level, see that, so we all are red, we're all comrades, and when the comrades are in power, the region will work better together, or the comrades brother. And there are certain key things in the OECS integration, and we have been very good at that, regardless of the changes in the political systems by countries. We've managed to keep certain key things at the OECS level functioning as they should. Maybe we need to find a way now to maybe let the OECS take over more. I know that's a
Dr.
scary thing.
Yeah, Dr. Fire,
So
I see
that
your
we can
hands
have
up.
national development.
No, I was thinking about it, the long-term plans, right? In my way of thinking, and I ain't saying that this is the best way, but I don't think beyond 5 years. I don't think beyond 5 years, because when you think beyond 5 years, 20 years, so many things can change, right? And then
I
the
agree.
ones that are totally unpredictable, right?
I agree.
We didn't see COVID coming, put a wrench in your plans. We didn't know Oma was gonna come in 2017, put a wrench in your plans too. So I like 1 to 5 years, because in economics and finance, the only difference between year one and year two is the changes that took place in year two. So if I put year one in place, right? Year two will be the changes that I made to year one. Additions to or deductions from, right?
Yeah,
So
but
year
some
two,
things need long-term planning beyond that 5-year cycle.
I all right. I ain't gonna disagree. I ain't gonna say no. I ain't gonna say no, but you ain't getting me to think
To
15
say
years.
yes, I hear
You ain't,
you.
you ain't getting me to think 15 years from now.
But a good example of long-term planning was the airport master plan, Dr. Webster.
There you
Mhm.
go.
That is correct. And I mean, that was something that was done. It was well thought out. Consultants were involved, and there was a plan for the next 40 years that this is how you would develop the airport, from the terminal, the parking lots, the new cargo facility, the runway expansion. All of this was planned out, consulted on, report written, and we were following that plan.
And
We
is it
felt,
still holding?
well, it's really,
It was
um,
paused. It
it
was
was
paused.
paused, yes, and we should have started um, building the runway expansion since June of 2025. We are now almost June of 26, a year later, and we're still not there. And so those are the things that changes in government do. They derail plans, and that makes the point that you just made. Both you, Petra, Dr. Foy made, that you can have the best plans that they are, but then politics get in the way, and that's what has happened.
Let's go back to the plans for a minute, right? I have heard even of 50-year plans, right?
Yeah, for
Oh,
the
And
that's
50.
crazy.
don't get me wrong, right? It's just that 50 years from now, to plan for it now, right? To plan for it now. You can have an idea about it, right? But a real solid plan, right? I really think it is possible to make a solid. Wait, if you're making a plan, it's supposed to have a financial section. Tell me the financial section for 50 years from now.
Hmm.
Tell me
I
the
can,
financial
I
part.
can, I can. I can justify that. I can do that two ways.
Mhm,
Bear with me for 2 seconds. So I went to China in when I was 22, and
mhm,
Beijing was a hot mess. It was a hot mess. It was
mhm,
smoggy. It was nasty. I got sick in Anhui just from being there.
mhm.
I went back to Beijing when I was 52. Yes, I had a. You see that window, and
Mhm,
when I was there when I was there when I was younger, they had a plan. They had a master plan that I was
mhm,
like, y'all crazy. Going back, I could actually see where, and their master plan was not a. It was a 15 or 20-year plan, right?
mhm,
But they had 7-year cycles inside. No, so no, it was a 21-year plan, and they had
mhm,
7-year cycles inside of that, and then inside of that they had 3-year cycles, and so on and so on and so on. And
But Mitra, remember,
yes,
China does not have a democracy. They have a
I am coming. Hold
meritocracy.
on, hold on. No, 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 I'm coming. I'm gonna make. I'm giving you two examples. And so going back, I could see where they did the deed and did what they had to do. Now I'm gonna compare that to again, and this one I've traveled to more regularly to the U.S. A little stressful, but they also had some plans that they made for their development. And I'm going to start with a very interesting example. Does anybody know the square mile of Bronx and Brooklyn? I'm going to put it to you that Anguilla
It's
is
bigger.
bigger than the Bronx,
It's bigger than the Bronx, yes.
right? And Anguilla is either bigger than or as big as Manhattan.
Yes, yes, bigger than Manhattan. But
All
Manhattan
right.
has 7 million people.
All right. And Manhattan, in both of those places, they worked 40 and 50-year plans inside of having to change mayors, instead of having to change senators, instead of having to change presidents, all of whom, and remember, they have very layered and cumbersome tax structures, development structures, who has the right to say what, where, and so on. But in the middle of all of that, democracy, they kept certain plans going. Now, here's the interesting difference between how they got it done and our challenges. A lot of it was private sector led.
mhm.
Whereas for our development, a lot of it is public sector led.
But in
So, sorry, I can't hear you. Check your mic or something. I can't hear you.
China's case, is public
Uh-huh.
sector.
In
So in
China's
China,
case, it was government, yes.
right? So in China has a meritocracy.
Hmm.
America has a
China has a
democracy.
what? Hold on, hold on.
A
China has a what?
meritocracy. A
I know about
meritocracy.
a dictatocracy. Go ahead.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's a
It's a
meritocracy.
dictatocracy.
There's 5 layers. No, the China political system is very complex. It's 5 layers to get to the presidency. It goes
Hmm.
through a system of 5 layers. And so
And
on
all
merit,
of them, and everybody's in one party. You
well,
have to
everybody
be in
to
the
one
party to
party,
function.
but it isn't as simple and uncomplicated as you think. Because the reality is that even though that is the case, China has one party, but they change a policy. In America, you have multiple parties, but they don't really change the policy.
No, but,
The
but,
policy,
but which, no, but which is why I'm suggesting to you that in their case, a lot of their successes were private sector driven.
right? But in
Right.
America,
So it's just
the
to show you the
policies,
difference in the model.
the policies change very little from Republican to Democrat.
Because they weren't in charge, because they weren't
Right.
executing.
But in China, policies change, even though you have one party. No, the system
But
of
one
politics.
second, but the rate at which policies change, because for example, China policies them, they held for like 15 years, sometimes 20, before they then made a change.
Because the Chinese had a bigger goal. So they have the grand
Agreed.
plan. And they have the grand plan. So everything is geared towards achieving the grand plan. So let us say China has been able to pull over $500 million out of 500 million people out of abstract poverty. 500 million is more than the entire population of the US
Hmm.
by far.
Right.
Now, China will have a province, for example, and the person who's responsible for that province have a particular budget, a particular time to get those people out of that level of poverty. And he have indicators and markers. If he does not meet those
Yes.
indicators at all, he's removed and someone else replaces him in order to do so.
Yes. Agreed.
So, so the reality is that the political systems are very different. But it says a lot about democracy because America touts the whole idea of democracy, but America don't care about democracy. Because if America care about democracy, they wouldn't be having these family kingdoms in Saudi Arabia, in all of these countries that they prop up. So it makes sense to them when they want to expose democracy because Saudi Arabia is a
But
key
hold
ally
on,
to
but
them.
hold on. No, no, no. But you've gone too far, because even within America, they have kingdoms, for want of a better word, that they prop up. It's just that we're, and this is how they are able to succeed. The point I'm making is, and I'm gonna come home to Antigua. I need to come back to Anguilla. I haven't been to Anguilla in a long time. I'm gonna tell you how long ago. That's another story. We need to fix that. Y'all need to invite me over. But I'm gonna use Antigua as an example. So prior, the previous administration had a mantra of people first. But in their people first model, they wanted to privatize a lot of state-owned enterprises to make them more efficient. I'm using it as an example. The administration changes and the people first mantra stayed, but this administration decides that they're going to institutionalize public holding of enterprises, make them more efficient, and then get the people to invest, become the shareholders and owners of the enterprises. The question becomes which model, because and that's something that is a very real test case for Antigua, is which model has generated the greater good for the majority. That is that I think that is a model that is worth a PhD analysis. I will not be doing it. Um, but perhaps it's things like those that we look at how now our small island economies are actually creating new models for economic development that we're not paying attention to. That even in Anguilla, between everything that is happening now, that there is a model somewhere of economic development that is evolving. Note my choice of words. That is evolving out of how the country is being managed. That is worth some in-depth assessment to see, is that perhaps a good template for Anguilla to further develop as it seeks to do the best for its citizens? And is it a model that perhaps is exportable to, say, a Montserrat, a Virgin Gorda, or are there lessons from those countries that are of similar size? And well, the Virgin Gordas on similar economies and so on, that we can begin to, because I don't think we look across each other sufficiently for case studies and best practices that we can then inculcate into getting the best for our economies. I think that's one of the shortcomings of us as a region, that we still look outside. I mean, we're looking at people whose economies don't look like ours, whose policies don't look like ours, to get examples of what we can do. And I think there's so much across from us, each other, that we can look at. We're all tourism based, tourism is and so on. So many things that we can begin to look across at each other more for best practices for our to become more resilient, to become more productive. Gosh knows we need to become more productive desperately. and to build
Yes.
our economies.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So we'll have some closing remarks. We've been here for quite a while. We have quite a listening audience. I'm sure people have been blessed with the things that we've been saying. Closing remarks. Anybody can jump in first.
Well, I'll go first. I will begin by saying it's been a pleasure to be a part of this panel. I really enjoyed. Thank you for having me. I hope that your listening audience got some nuggets even to think on, especially if they disagreed, because that helps to stimulate further discussions. I want to wish all of you the best as you continue to look out for the best for Anguilla. I'm due back. I've been 4 times, and it's just too long. And I just want to, again, thank you for having me and to wish all of you the best as you continue to look out for the best for your country.
Well,
Thank you so much.
as we in these smaller islands seek to move forward, one of the things that we must try and maintain is the levels of stability that in part have been provided through the OECS and the central bank. Stability is very important. Stability, it gives investors confidence. Yes, we talk about building from within, but we still got to tap into capital from foreign sources. So we still need to be able to attract investment, right? And at the same time, while we look at internal issues, internal policies, what we can do to help ourselves to become more self-sufficient in food and stuff like that, right? We got to also ensure that in times of crisis, our very own policies don't hit us with friendly fire.
Well,
Thanks,
this
Doc.
was, yeah, that was a good pause there. I like the comment about friendly fire because you are correct that sometimes our internal policies may be well intentioned, but they end up setting us back. Um, I want to thank you, Dr. Boy and Ms. Williams, for your input and for joining us on this panel discussion because I think you did allude to several areas that can benefit us as a people in the region and then more specifically in Anguilla. Um, Ms. Williams mentioned about the ECCB and the backing reserves, which are several $1 billion, billions that some of that, a percentage of that, can be utilized right now to help in areas such as security, in terms of our islands separated by water. For drug trafficking and gun running and human trafficking. I think that as a region, we need to do more in that regard. We cannot rely on the goodness of strangers, especially those who are trying to shoot us out of the water. Fishermen are now endangered species by being in the wrong waters or in the right waters at the wrong time. And so that's something that I feel that can be done by the ECCB. Also looking at the scourge of gun crime and violence that we have, that more should be done to put more resources into that. And I think that the ECCB, as kind of the gel that holds the currency union together, can be utilized. Just like when I was chair of the Monetary Council, we were able to move forward with getting some funding to increase our food security, and with 25 million was then put aside for the 8 nations to divide up to assist. And I think that more can be done in those areas. And in terms of regional transportation, as you said, Ms. Williams, certainly an area that has been discussed at the Currency Union, at the OECS, at CARICOM, and I don't think enough has been done where the independent airlines that are owned by persons in the region have not been bolstered up like Liat used to be back in the day to make sure that we could get from island to island. A ferry service was mentioned on last week's program, something that I think that the OECS and ECCB and ECCU can work on to get movement of persons back and forth. Some of our islands, some of our people have not visited the islands, our own neighbors. And I think that it's important that we see how each other live so that we can live together better. And one of the concerns I have about the OECS is that we are together, but we are unequal. The overseas British overseas territories that are part of the OECS are not considered in the same, at the same level as the independent countries. And so there are grants, there's aid that comes from other entities, and that is not, we do not benefit as overseas territories from some of those grants. Now, some of that is due to the funding agency like World Bank, and because we are not independent and we come under the British flag, we're not eligible. But there are other areas where we should be able to benefit from some of the research and that is paid for by private entities that some of us should be able to benefit from. So I think that more, just like we cooperate in terms of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, where Anguilla, even though it's an associate member, has equal say because we all contribute to that. I think we should have similar ways of making sure that the overseas territories benefit more from that association. I think that would help to strengthen the bonds that hold us together. And so again, I just want to say this was a very, very interesting discussion. I learned a lot tonight listening to Ms. Williams, looking at it from a regional and global standpoint. I learned a lot from Dr. Foy, who is a hidden gem in Anguilla that he stays too much hidden under that rock. We got to make sure that we bring him out more often so we can tap into what his knowledge and his experience. He has done this, and I think if we did that, we would find that Anguilla as a country would benefit more from, and not only from the economic standpoint, but from his social awareness, having been part of the Anguillan public service, but also part of the region. So, and then want to thank you, Minister Hughes, for moderating well, and then Courtney for coming in and letting us see on the ground, how your time in Anglec can be utilized towards more benefits for the people of Anguilla, and also being in the Ministry of Finance, how certain policies that we implemented were done in the best interest, and certainly, and a lot of it didn't come easily. There was a lot of opposition to some of the programs that we came up with. You bringing in the Medicare type system of the Senior Shield and then Junior Shield. People don't realize the impact that has had. In fact, if you talk to certain people in Anguilla right now whose parents or grandparents went through and were in the hospital for prolonged periods of time, and what that saved them in terms of, some persons told me it saved them $80,000 to $100,000 in medical costs, that their parents or grandparents were treated well, and they wouldn't have been able to afford that, but because of those policies, that they have been able to. And those are the types of policies that we have to do and programs that we have to implement for our people. Certainly, it comes with a cost. But it has to be that we are willing as a people, as a resilient people. We say we are resilient. We said we are proud. We are strong, not yet free, Minister Hughes. But we say that we have to make those small sacrifices so that we can get the larger benefit. So things like a national health insurance, things like a national development plan, these are necessary as we go forward to to make sure that we can survive not these shocks that are upon us, but that we prepare for the shocks that can come and that will come. And as Dr. Foy says, we have to keep every year and every day planning for those shocks and, being prudent with the public purse so that we can withstand them when they do come. So I want to thank everyone again tonight. Thank all our listeners and certainly those who've been watching and the input that we get from the public who send in questions, who make comments. And then now I turn it back over to you, Minister Hughes. And sorry that I took up so much of your time.
Absolutely fine. I don't know if Courtney is still there.
Yeah, I'm still here. Just like I said,
Yeah.
thank you for having me on the panel tonight. I mean, tonight was more of an educational one for me. I've learned a lot from Petra and also from Dr. Foy.
Well, Petra, it's spelled Petra, but do we
Yes,
pronounce
sir.
it
To
Petra?
add that
Yes,
here in
Petra.
Angola, we could do so much more.
Yes,
Look at
thank you very
removing
much. We
some of
really,
those
really
FOPs.
thank you. Thank
Petra.
you very much for being here with us. I am sure the people of Angola appreciate your input and your insight. And Dr. Foy, as always, thank you so much. Hopefully we can reconstitute that pension fund, pension board very quickly so we can move forward with the National Pension for All. But again, I want to thank you all, and I want to thank everybody who's been listening, wherever they are in the diaspora here in Angola. There's a lot of historical ties between Angola and Antigua as well. It's not only that we both start with A and end with A. But I just want to thank everybody for being here with us, and tune in next week at the same time at 7:30 with Online with APM. Thank you. Good night, and God bless you, and God bless Angola.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you. Fellow Anguillians, true leadership does not require an office. It does not depend on a title, a position, or the trappings of power. Leadership is measured in action, in impact, and in unwavering commitment to the people. Leadership is like steering a boat through a storm. It is not the size of the vessel or the rank of the captain that matters, but the hands on the wheel, the eyes on the horizon, and the courage to navigate the waves for everyone on board. I speak to you today because you can trust me to stand in the gap. I have never wavered in my commitment to Anguilla. I will always show up for you. I will stand with our families, our workers, our business owners, and our communities, not from behind a desk, but where it matters most, in the lives of every Anguillian who looks to their leaders with the expectation that they will have the courage and determination to act decisively when it matters most for the good of all, above the fray and beyond politics. Ladies and gentlemen, prices are continuing to rise in this global environment, and Anguilla is directly affected. Freight costs are going up. Your weekly food shopping costs more. Running a business costs more. But I'm not here to tell you things you already know. I am here to propose what can be done and why Anguilla is in a position to do it right now. The reserves were built for this moment. When I left office, Anguilla's reserves stood at over $300 million. Those reserves were not built by accident. They were built through difficult, sometimes unpopular decisions that were publicly opposed by those now in government, who argued that the sacrifice to build reserves was not worth it. It was worth it. Reserves exist so that when the world outside Anguilla makes things harder for us, rising global prices, supply disruptions, energy shocks, the government can stand in the gap for its people. We use those reserves before to deliver electricity credits, support our seniors, and to fund Senior and Junior Shield. That same logic applies today. Based on the reserve position, a structured relief package of this nature can be sustained for a minimum of 12 months and realistically 18 months without significant risk to public finances. The money is there. The only question is whether it will be used for the people it was saved for rather than unnecessary expenses overseas. Governments cannot rely on yesterday's solutions to confront today's realities. These are not ordinary times. We stand in an era marked by global instability, looming existential crises, and the cyclical threats of natural disasters that continue to test the resilience of our people. In such a moment, governance cannot afford to be routine. It must be bold, innovative, and intentional. Because, let us be clear, relying on ordinary relief in the face of extraordinary challenges is not just inadequate, it is a non-starter. This is the hour that demands more foresight, more courage, and more decisive action for the people we serve and the future we must secure. Proposal number 1, reduce import duties. Import duty is charged on the total value of goods, not just the cost to bring them into the country. So when global prices rise for essentials like rice, cooking oil, or building materials, the duty charge rises as well, even if the rate itself hasn't changed. That increase is passed directly on to Anguillan families every time they shop. By expanding the current duty reduction framework applied to essential items, the government can provide immediate relief at the checkout. Lower duties means lower prices. Proposal number 2, cap freight costs on essentials. Freight is one of the hidden drivers of high prices. By the time goods reach store shelves, the shipping cost has already been built into the price. You don't see it, but you are paying for it. Just a few years ago, it cost about $1,500 to ship a container of basic goods. Today, that same container can cost over $4,000. And that increase is spread across every item inside, pushing up the cost of everyday essentials. By capping the portion of freight costs passed on to consumers for essential goods, government can help bring prices down. This would put real money back into the pockets of Anguillan families, while also easing the burden on businesses that have been struggling to manage these rising costs. Proposal number 3, continue with and expand on electricity credits. These measures assist the broad population of Anguilla in an equitable manner, ensuring that everyone is touched by government's proposals, whether they are in the private or public sector. These are not complicated measures. They do not require new institutions or new borrowing. They require the government of the day to decide that the reserves built by the people of Anguilla should now work for the people of Anguilla. Proposal number 4, reduce or remove the Universal Stabilization Levy. At a time when families and businesses are under significant strain, government must look seriously at the burden of income-based taxes like the Universal Stabilization Levy. This is a direct deduction from earnings, meaning less money in people's pockets before they even have a chance to spend, save, or invest. Reducing or removing the USL would deliver immediate tangible relief. Workers would take home more of what they earn, and businesses would retain more of their revenue, freeing up cash to manage rising costs, keep people employed, and continue operating in a difficult economic environment. This is one of the most direct ways to stimulate the economy from within. It increases spending power, supports business activity, and provides breathing room across the board without adding complexity or delay. In a moment like this, relief must be felt quickly, and it must be felt where it matters most, in the hands and lives of the people. Proposal number 5, direct investment in the Anguilla Electricity Company. In times of global instability, sound policy must focus on reducing risk and strengthening national resilience. Energy sits at the center of both. The government of Anguilla should take a more direct role by investing the capital needed to reposition Anglec for the future. At present, the company remains heavily reliant on imported fossil fuels, which leaves electricity costs exposed to volatile global oil prices and external shocks beyond our control. At the same time, a strong focus on loan repayment limits the organization's ability to make the strategic investments needed to break that cycle. A direct government investment should ease that pressure and allow ANGLEC to shift its short to medium-term priorities towards increasing energy independence and expanding access to low-cost power. This includes accelerating the transition to renewable energy, improving infrastructure, and reducing the overall cost of electricity for consumers. The goal is simple but critical: energy justice. Affordable, reliable power for every household and business. By reducing reliance on expensive imported fuel and lowering financial risk, we can stabilize electricity prices and strengthen the wider economy. When energy costs come down, it creates room for relief across the board, from household expenses to the cost of doing business. In a moment like this, investing directly in our energy future is not just good policy, it is necessary leadership. There are many other achievable options, such as partnering with the United Kingdom and regional counterparts to strengthen supply chains, expand the scope of support to those on social programs such as welfare, invest in the institutional realization of food security, review all government fees with the intention to both lower and eliminate, and most importantly, adjust your lens to regard government support as a hand up and not a handout. Fellow Anguillians, the path forward is clear. The resources exist, the solutions are within reach, and the need is undeniable. This is not a question of possibility, it is a question of priority. Will this government choose to act decisively in the interest of its people? Or will it hesitate while families continue to struggle and businesses fight to stay afloat? The measures outlined here are practical, responsible, and immediately achievable. They reflect a simple belief that in difficult times, government must stand with its people, not stand aside. This is our moment to act with purpose, to use what we have built to protect what matters most, to ease the burden on every household and restore confidence across our economy. Because leadership is not tested when times are easy. It is defined by what is done when they are not. And the people of Anguilla deserve nothing less than action, nothing less than relief, and nothing less than a government prepared to meet this moment with the urgency and courage it demands. It is often said, government is for the people. Let's make that a reality. This is not the time to pause, but the time to act boldly and compassionately. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless Anguilla.